There you go.
Okay. So my chapter was all about relationships, and it went into quite detail about what kind of relationships in personal life, social life, work life, um, even in with a boss and an employee, and also with relationships between a teacher and their student. So it was a lot of detail about relationships, that where a relationship can start and what extent can it go through. It goes through stages of relationship. So it's usually relationships can be easily distinguished into personal or social or voluntary or involuntary phases. So, like for example, they were talking about that some relationships are mostly acquaintances, where you have to say hi, and then that's where the relationship ends. And then some relationship starts off by acquaintances, then turns into friendship, then maybe into dating, and then maybe into living together, or common law partners, and then maybe marriage, and then the relationship goes like that. There were so the, it was a lot of detail about experimenting, intensifying, bonding in relationships, and what circumstances happens in relationship where they start drifting apart, and the relationship terminates. And then they were mentioning about the dark side of a relationship where things can get really ugly. For example, when a love relationship turns into marriage and then suddenly goes into divorce with all the fighting and stuff. And then some relationship where it's always the happy, easygoing relationship where not a lot of issues come up, people are more understanding, so stuff like that. And then there was there was something that I came across, and I didn't know those type of it's worded this way. So there are three main types of intimate partner violence. It's IPV. I haven't heard of this before, but one is intimate terrorism, involves violence used to have general control over the other person. I didn't even know it had a title before. Like I've heard of it, but and then another one is violent resistance, which is VR, usually a response or reaction to violence from an intimate terrorist. And the other one is situational couple violence. So SCV is the most common type of IPV and is a reaction to stressful situations, and does not involve a quest for control. So that was something new I read about in this chapter. Then it talked about how relationships get into, first it goes through a communication process. It could be verbal, it could be nonverbal communication and aggression, and then some type of communication can make the relationship really bitter. It depends on how the other person takes it. It can take forms of verbal emotional abuse, and psychological abuse. So that was pretty interesting to read about. And then they were talking about relationships where, and there was a lot to read about, where they were saying that most relationships start off in school. Means school, when I'm mentioning school, not elementary or middle or high school, in college. And then some people continue on that relationship for many, many years. And it's healthy in such a way that, it helps in work in the future, keeping in touch, finding employment, and builds up your self esteem, and then goes on and on. They say that people who do not communicate well have not made a lot of relationships in their schooling life, and that's when they struggle in their work life and in the future. And then the peer co-worker relationship ranges from those who are purely information based to those that are logical and include many and all dimensions of friendship. So you can be just good relationship work friends, or you can take it another step and be friends outside of work. And then some relationships they were talking about where at work romances are involved. So that's done. And then so it just talks about all type of relationships and going into the detail where it gets into sexuality and relationship and employee satisfaction. So there's a lot of scenarios, a lot of examples given in that. So that's pretty much all about this chapter. And then I wanted to ask the question is that from the group, so it's only two of you. So, so what type of relationship do you guys avoid the most that you're scared of? And you have had experience and you do not like it and you avoid the most? And like,
I've never been. Oh, sorry, Ryan.
No, go ahead.
Are you still filming?
Yep,
Are we supposed to film it?
I think so.
Not
yeah,
the discussion?
yeah, it
Oh,
doesn't matter.
okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've never been in a lot of relationships, but the few that I have, I learned to avoid the relationships where I find the other person was toxic, but in a sense of just being, I would say, mean. Kind of always using the little put downs here and there, the little small insults that are, they're kind of like ha ha ha. It's a little bit funny, and then after a while it gets old, and you're like, it's not that funny, not anymore. So yeah, those are the relationships I try to avoid is those small, those kind of toxic relationships where it seems like people are trying to almost.
Cocky remarks.
Sorry.
It's when people make cocky remarks.
Yeah, it's almost like they're trying to take you down a peg.
Yes.
So yeah, those are the ones
But
I
at
try
the
to
same
avoid.
time, act like they're joking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I um I'm about the same. I stay away from toxic people. For me, my gut tells me a lot about a person. And I've learned over the years, listen to your gut because, excuse me, if you get a bad feeling about somebody, there's usually a reason why, right? And I've gotten rid of a lot of negative people out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, a friend of 28 years, and her and I were very close, but her relationship actually with her husband was so negative that that's all I ever heard about. And it was starting to affect me. So, when she would talk to me about their issues, I'd find myself getting angry.
So we're off on
And finally I just had to cut that relationship because, they've been together for just about 40 years.
Wow.
But if you're going to stay in that relationship, then stop talking about it, all the issues in the relationship with everybody else.
Right.
I listened for so many years, and that's exactly what I do. I would sit there and nod and oh yeah, and bite my tongue because who am I to say why don't you just leave him? But yeah, I just had to say, you know what, I just can't do it anymore.
Okay.
And I think probably we all avoid abusive relationships, depending on what relationship we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be with a significant other or I myself haven't been in a physically abusive relationship. I have been in a relationship where I realized years down the road that he was a narcissist.
Hmm.
So, think 5 minutes is up for this one. Do we want to start?
Yep,
Your chapter?
I can start. I'll set my timer.
Ryan, will you be able to continue the whole video? Oh, okay.
Yep, it's good.
So my chapter review was chapter 10, delivering a speech. And I have to say it wasn't the most exciting chapter. As Ryan smiles, because you know what I'm talking about. Some of it was really interesting, but some of it was kind of, oh yeah, okay. So I found it really interesting that some people would rather have their worst nightmare come true than speak publicly.
Wow.
Like, falling from a roof or being in a pile of snakes. Like, that's how bad some people's anxiety is. So the chapter focuses on effective speech, overcoming anxiety by using simple exercises, by practicing to be more of a confident speaker. Also goes into detail about our mannerism and our appearance and how that can be perceived by people in different ways. And what I found really interesting about that is because when I watch a speaker, if they're, wandering around the stage and seem to be acknowledging their audience, in this chapter, it actually says that a lot of times you can be perceived as being nervous and not quite knowing what you're doing. So there's one part, communication apprehension, that I never knew has two categories, which are trait, which is incorporated into the person's personality, and state, which is usually at a certain time or situation. And then the other one is communication anxiety as being part of your personality. I never thought of communication anxiety being, part of your personality. I always thought that it was just like, you get anxiety. I know I do if I have to do a speech. What they also go into different exercises, how you can warm up your vocals, how you can, reduce the speaking anxiety by doing simple exercises like deep breathing. There were some parts where they were saying certain exercises for your voice, like we normally would hear somebody doing, like the the ands, the mum. Also about how, literally you can't die of embarrassment, and that's what people are so afraid of. And I know I'm like that when I have to do a speech. So then they also talked about how people deliver their speeches. So impromptu delivery, there was manuscript delivery, memorizing, which they, in the chapter they were talking about memorizing and saying that actually isn't a good way to do your speeches. A lot of people think that by memorizing it, you do way better, but in actual fact, you don't, because when you memorize something, if, say, somebody threw a question in there, would stump you, and then you would kind of forget where you were. So pretty much what they're saying is just practice being more relaxed, and go over your notes and make sure that they're quite spaced apart on paper, so that if you do get asked a question or you're interrupted, you can easily find where you left off. Because if you just do, single line, you'll lose your placement. Dressing, how you dress is a big one. You want to look professional. How you stand, I don't know about you guys, but how you always hear about how people stand with their arms folded. You could be perceived as being standoffish or angry, or so. Like I say, some parts were really interesting, some not so much. So, and my question was, how do you think you would be perceived if you were giving a speech?
I'll go first. So, having had to speak publicly fairly often, I've always looked for feedback after the fact, because in my mind, I feel like when I'm finished, I've stumbled a lot, stumbled over my words. I can't find the words, and it's kind of my own worst enemy, because I don't. It's usually I'm winging it. It's usually on the fly, and I feel like I look kind of stupid, just not being able to find the words, and it's just like stuttering and bumbling. But when I've asked people, I'm like, hey, just curious, how do you think that was? They said, you did fine. You were obviously winging it, but it was not a prepared speech. It was just a report, and yeah, it was fine. You did great. So it was interesting to see the perspective from people who speak all the time to somebody who doesn't, and who thinks they did really poorly, but they're like, no, you did fine for somebody who never speaks publicly on a regular basis. So.
But we all do that, don't we? We self-analyze. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I probably looked like an idiot up there. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh,
So, I think people would say if I give a speech, first of all, I would avoid it completely. I would not give a speech at all. I would be very nervous. People will say, oh, she was nervous. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking here and there. Because that's me. I can't. I will not give a speech, but if I have to, then I would be really, really prepared. I wouldn't memorize it, because I've done this in the past in one of my grades. I memorized something. Somebody said, oh, just memorize it. It's easy. And I forgot a word. And then I didn't know how to complete the whole thing. I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot the whole thing, because it was all memorized, And yes, a question did come in the middle where somebody put up their hand, and I was like, oh my God, not now, but I'll forget it. And I took the question, and after that, I didn't know how to finish the speech or whatever I was saying at that time. So I would be very nervous. People would say that. I haven't got feedback from anybody in my previous speeches, but I would just prepare really well and be nervous, and I would fidget a little bit on my pencil, or try to take it off topic or something. That's so, just so the attention is diverted.
Well, one part I actually wrote in my review. What resonated with me the most was that sociology response resonated, because when I have to speak publicly, my heart races, my palms are sweaty, my stomach turns, my face feels like it's on fire.
Yep. Same here.
And then I'll try and speed through it.
Yeah.
And there's no emotion. It's just blah, 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 blah. And I'm speaking super fast.
Yeah.
I did that with our one class. We all had to do the presentation, and then it came my part, and I'm reading, and I'm just like, la, 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 just get it over and done with. I just don't want anybody staring at me, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how we think. Everybody's just looking at us like, Okay. But yet we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe
I got that done.
the next chapter review, you have the date,
Oh, yep. Give me 1 second.
and then I think those two can do it then.
November 22nd, 21st, 6:30.
I think I have.
Okay.
Is that our meeting that we set up?
6:30 or 6?
6. Well, you know what? I didn't actually have a time down, but we can set it now and just email them.
Is that the day? What was that? November 21st, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have it down for November 21st from 6 to 7, so maybe you
Okay.
did mention it.
Well, let's stick with that then.
Oh, hang on. November. I can't. Oh, no. Do we have a Zoom meeting with Lisa that day
I'll
Oh.
check.
Yeah,
from 6 till 7? Maybe that's why you have that down, right?
Yeah. maybe that's why I have that down.
Yeah, that's not our group meeting. That's our DAX 2320.